can do that again, and these are the key words. I'll mention each one as we get to it, and they weave them in these really beautifully written narrative paragraphs. The data sets associated with, quote, twin earthquakes. Every time I say, quote, those are the key words that they've come up in their research, and you'll see how they've woven them into these paragraphs. The data sets associated with, quote, twin earthquakes continues to grow. The newly supporting sets are within the aspect attribute sets of, quote, pulsating motion and, quote, rippling ground, and motion of and in ground. These are all key words which are indicative of some kind of large-scale geological activity. Now, what is the origin of twin earthquakes? And everyone wants to know, of course, what geographical quadrant, location, venue they might be occurring.
Well, we're still showing them hitting in the data, and our numerics can be off, but we've been fairly decent with earthquakes. I mean, we're 36 hours ahead on the Chinese quake, the major one back here this year. So, and a few others. So we've been reasonably accurate with
the one that killed 200,000 people.
Yeah.
Or whatever it was, 100,000 people.
Yeah, and our current forecast at this stage still shows. We've had no change in the data from which we should back off, but it shows two earthquakes in close proximity to each other temporally. That is to say, within a couple of days of each other. And our most likely range is December 10, 11, and 12. And it could shade to a day earlier or a day later, really, because we're off frequently by 24 to 36 hours on some of this stuff. But it shows these earthquakes are twinned in the sense that they share a relationship to each other across the hyperdimensional grid that can be overlaid on the planet Earth, which sounds like some kind of woo-woo statement. But basically what we're saying is we're going to get one earthquake, and it will be of a sizable level to the point where damage, isolation, damage to infrastructure, shutting off of water, damage to roads, where language like that shows up within our archetype, and it will be the same in both earthquakes. One will be slightly smaller than the other. One will have 5 aftershocks associated with it that are not part of the other earthquake. So the second earthquake may have 5 good aftershocks with it. There may be like a day or so between these earthquakes. We suspect that the most likely scenario places an earthquake between 32 degrees north latitude and 36 degrees north latitude, which would be, say, from southern Turkey up into the Stans, Uzbekistan, et cetera, right? Or from northern Vietnam up into China, that kind of a deal, or from California.
Well, the Turkey and the Stans are notoriously earthquake active. Yes.
So that whole band is because of the nature of the hyperdimensional tetrahedral shapes that are actually expressing themselves as our planet. But we needn't go into that. For our purposes here, that would be one scenario would be that would be earthquake number 1, and it would be of a sufficient magnitude to disrupt life and isolate areas, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And a secondary earthquake, if we're correct, would probably most likely occur in southern Alaska all the way down to, say, northern Oregon, and again, may be offshore, which
has been a nest of activity.
It has, and this has been part of our problem, is that we've been talking about this earthquake since essentially December of last year. And so we didn't have a whole lot of parameters, and nothing has really changed over the course of this year, so it keeps looking more and more firm, if you will, in our particular estimation. I sure hope we're wrong, but as you say, there's all these things out there in manifesting reality, the continuing swarms of earthquakes along the coast here, the ring of fires getting active, et cetera. But the secondary potential would be for both earthquakes to be in the American hemisphere, with one up here in the Pacific Northwest and one down in Chile, opposite on these particular vertices relative to the icosahedron that we overlay on the planet for figuring this stuff out.
I understand.
And then after that, there's some other language that suggests the government's going to make things worse, and since our government's really good at making things worse, that also tends to center one of the earthquakes here. There's the recent rise in elevation of consciousness about the earthquakes, though, especially with the large-scale test in California. because it was a few weeks ago, if it had shown up with a test on the 10th or the 11th of December, we would have said, aha, that's what we were getting, was all the language about the test with all these millions of people involved. Mm-hmm. But because we still have the data for the 10th or 11th of December, and the test was a few weeks back, or a week back, the language still would tend to support the earthquakes as being actual manifesting reality. Why they chose this particular time to do their giant duck and cover in California is anybody's guess, but I'm sure it's related.
Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, we should check with Jim Birkeland to see what his window is.
He's very accurate.
Yeah, you've seen Jim's work, and he's pushing right around 80%.
I would not like to find out what it is, actually, because I'm afraid that it would coincide with what we're showing here, because there's all kinds of strange planetary crud that lines up for December 10th, 11th, and 12th with moons, the moon being very close to the Earth, second closest point, I think, in its lunation change.
That's Jim Birkeland.
Okay.
Yeah, when it's apogee, perigee, and all that. The moon, the lunar influence on earthquakes is enormous.
Right, and we're starting to ramp up on GRBs, gamma ray bursts, and those always precede earthquakes by a couple of weeks, too.
Okay.
So.
All right, well, there you go. Jim Birkeland's website is syzygyjob.com. Syzygy, syzygyjob, there's Jim's initials, job.com. He is a geologist. He's just a remarkable man in his field. Okay, we'll be right back with Clif in a couple of minutes and continue our conversation. So look for Jim Birkeland's window as overlaid by the work that Clif and George are presenting. It's very interesting. Back after this. Okay, talking with Clif High and his partner George Ure. Together, halfpasthuman.com. All right, we have one segment. These hours always fly. What would you like to touch on in this hour, Clif?
Well, we might as well stick for a minute with the Terra stuff and go have a quick discussion about our global coastal event, which I actually think, I'm not a big doom and gloom fellow around earthquakes because it's just usually bad engineering that kills people, not the earthquake itself.
All true. Having grown up in Southern Cal and Santa Barbara, been through many of them, and you couldn't be more right.
And I've been in really old buildings in Mexico City and gone through an 8.1 with only a little bit of damage to my elbow from being bounced down the stairs. And
you were down there for that big one?
Yeah, for both of them.
Whoa.
That year. Wow. Curious coincidence, but yeah, and so it's bad engineering that gets people. If you're aware of your surroundings, you can take precautions.
And let me say something.
Yeah.
The worst place to be in an earthquake, folks, if you're in a building, is underneath a table, a bed, a piece of furniture. Where you want to be it's called the triangle of life. I posted this about a month ago. You want to be directly next to a desk, next to a bed, which will collapse, and they always leave a space directly adjacent to it, a small triangular space, which people survive in. And if they get underneath them, they get crushed. Yeah,
there were 10,000 people killed in the 8.1 in September, I believe it was, in 94, 93 in Mexico City. And those that survived that came out of it were in those triangular voids and all different kinds of buildings that had collapsed around them.
Yeah, it's true. Just remember, be right next to something. Don't get under it.
Right. And it will become pertinent. And if we have the time now. So if you have stuff in your house that could fall over, large furniture filled with large bookcases, armoires, this sort of thing, just take an L bracket and affix them to the wall. Anything to slow down their progress away from that wall and towards you or yours around on the floor. Very simple to do. Just find a stud. Very cheap, and these days there's very few places that are not potentially subject to earthquakes. If I lived in New Madrid, I would take this advice to heart because they're going to get earthquakes there of some considerable size. Mm-hmm. You know what else you can use beside L brackets to make it even easier? You can get very sturdy eye screws